I want to talk about something conceptually first. Okay. This is a chart of verbs in English. Okay. We're going to be looking at the imperfect in Spanish today. And that's going to give us the 4 most common tenses. And I'll show you something about that shortly. But it's good to be able to visually conceive of what certain tenses are doing. So if we look closely at, say, the simple present, I study every day, we can see that we usually use it for habitual action, past to present to future. Okay? So all these X's are when this could be happening. With a simple past, it's I studied last night. It's an action completed in the past. There's that little X saying it's over. Now, this may seem obvious, but it's good to be conscious of it because there are other forms of the past that actually don't necessarily tell you, if it's over or not. Doesn't give you all that information. This tells us it's done. I studied last night. It's not last night anymore. I'm done. Okay. And the simple future also just one little X. I will study tomorrow. It'll be a discrete action happening in the future. Okay. So on the other side of this line is the future. The past continuous is one of the expressions of what the imperfect covers. And we can see here in the graphic, there's a little more complexity. Okay. So I was studying when you called. Now, when we look at the imperfect briefly, we'll see there are a couple of ways we can translate it into English. Okay, so they're not exactly the same, but this graphic is a good graphic for it. So I was studying when you called. The action began in the past, but it implies possible continuation after the second past event, right? If I say I was studying when you called, we don't know. Like maybe I hung up after that and went back to studying. Maybe I agreed to join you at the restaurant and I stopped studying. We don't know, okay? We just know that the action was interrupted. It had been going on, it was interrupted. And who knows what the future of that imagined time was, even though it's all over now. So there are different ways of thinking about the past and the future and how we grammatically set it up. And these are things that in our native language, we get it. We don't even think about it, okay? But it is good to be aware of it, to be conscious of it so that we can use these verbs properly. Now, if we look at, say, our 501 Spanish verbs, okay, here's the verb amar. We've learned to decipher this page. We love this book. It's so handy. And so we know there's the gerund there, the past participle, which we're unsure of how to handle, but whatever, we know it's there. And then there are the 7 simple tenses on the left and the 7 compound tenses on the right. The 7th, by the way, kind of sneaks onto this page here at the bottom. Okay. What's important to understand about the imperfect, some Spanish programs actually teach it before they teach the simple past. Okay. Because these are the 4 most important tenses for you to know, the 4 tenses most used. If you look at the first 4 tenses, the first 4 of the simple ones, simple, right? It's the present. And then number 3 is the preterit, what we've already learned, and the future. And then there, number 2 is a little imperfect. Okay? So this is obviously an important tense. And now we're going to have all 4 of these. After that, we start getting into things that are potential or subjunctive or conditional, right? Things that require a lot more complexity of understanding the situation you're in, all right? Like after this, it starts getting into I would love, I might love, I had loved, would that I had loved, etc. Let's take a look at this intimidating wall of text. Okay. All right, so on the left are explanations of how to use el pretérito. Y a la derecha está una explicación de cómo utilizar el imperfecto. Ok, primero, yo voy a hablar del pretérito. ¿Ok? Vamos a hablar del pretérito. Nosotros ya sabemos, we already know, ya sabemos cómo utilizar el pretérito. Ya sabemos, we already know. Pero vamos a pensar sobre el pretérito primero para después entender el imperfecto. Entonces, hablando del pretérito, se usa el pretérito para hablar de acciones o situaciones pasadas, ¿ok? Y no solo pasadas, pero de un momento concreto, ¿no? Entonces, ahí. Y nada más. Un ejemplo sería, yo comí pizza, ¿no? Ahí está, simples, el pretérito, ¿ok? El primer párrafo, the first paragraph, el primer párrafo, el pretérito es para hablar de situaciones concretas, discretas, ocurridas y terminadas, ¿ok? Ocurridas y acabadas, terminadas. Un punto. Yo comí pizza. También se usa el pretérito para hablar de una acción o situación acabada en el pasado. ¿Ok? Entonces, eso sería así. ¿No? Es un poco más que un momento. ¿Ok? Entonces, no tiene que ser un punto, puede ser un bloque, pero funciona de la misma forma. Un punto o un bloque. En tu mente, no importa. ¿Ok? Está acabada y es discreta. Okay? Do you guys understand what I mean by discrete? Right? It is self-sufficient. It is itself. It is discrete. Ok, muy bien. Entonces, por ejemplo, el ejemplo del segundo sería, yo estudié por 3 años. Ok, yo estudié por 3 años. Sigue, it continues being, sigue siendo algo discreto. ¿Ok? No es un punto. 3 años es difícil pensar. 3 años no es un punto. Pero sí, es un bloque, es discreto. Yo estudié por 3 años. ¿Ok? Estos son los usos del pretérito. I'm going to go over these two concepts again one more time in Spanish. Okay? And then we're going to go over the imperfect. Okay? So el primer párrafo, the first paragraph, el primer párrafo. Se usa el pretérito, el pasado simples, ¿no? El pretérito, para hablar de acciones pasadas, concretas y ya ocurridas, already occurred, ya ocurridas. Momentos discretos, ¿ok? Un momento, es importante pensar en momentos, ¿no? El momento es importante. El momento es este X. Right? The moment is this X. El momento es ese X. O podemos pensar en un bloque, ¿ok? Los 3 años, 2 semanas, ¿ok? No es un punto, pero es discreto, completamente discreto. Ok. Ahora vamos a hablar del imperfecto. Se usa el pretérito imperfecto para hablar de acciones habituales en el pasado. ¿Ok? ¿Qué es una acción habitual? ¿Ok? Bueno, tenemos un ejemplo en el libro. ¿Ok? El ejemplo en el libro es mi perro y yo jugábamos. casi todos los días. Okay, almost all the days, almost every day. Okay, mi perro y yo jugábamos. We can even just get rid of this, right? And it still is a sentence. Okay. Ahora, bueno, vamos a continuar. Eso es habitual. Okay. Lunes jugábamos. Martes jugábamos. Miércoles jugábamos. Jugábamos mucho, jugábamos siempre, pero en el pasado, ¿no? Hoy no jugamos más. Mi perro está muerto. ¿Ok? No jugamos más. Se acabó. Pero era habitual. No era un momento. No fue un momento. No fue un bloque discreto. Un periodo discreto. Fue una cosa habitual. ¿Ok? El segundo párrafo, el segundo uso, se usa el pretérito imperfecto para hablar de una acción o situación en desarrollo. ¿Ok? Desarrollo es una linda palabra, una palabra importante. Y es una palabra que ustedes no conocen, en mi opinión. ¿Alguien aquí sabe qué es desarrollo? No, exacto. Desarrollo en inglés es development. ¿Ok? Entonces, se usa el pretérito imperfecto para hablar de una acción en desarrollo, en un momento del pasado. ¿Ok? Un ejemplo sería, a ver. Ok. Sí, perfecto. Entonces, un ejemplo sería eso. Your book will mention there are only 3 irregular verbs in the imperfect. That's nice. Only 3 irregular verbs in the perfect. All the irregular verbs start behaving, except the 3 big ones. Okay? So, íbamos is from ir, and it is in the imperfect. Okay? Entonces, es una situación en desarrollo. Now, this goes back to that first graphic I showed you guys. But what I'm going to do for the first one, mi perro y yo jugábamos, is say this. Okay? So the imperfect is capable of expressing this. Mi perro y yo jugábamos. Jugamos martes, jugamos miércoles, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Jugábamos siempre. Jugábamos mucho. Muchos X. Okay? I shouldn't have done all those X's because now they're going to be difficult to erase. All right, there we go. And you guys are welcome to draw this. I think I find these conceptually very helpful. So if you do as well, feel free to draw this. So that illustrates mi perro y yo jugábamos. Okay, so my dog and I played, or there are different ways we might say this in English. My dog and I used to play. My dog and I would play often, right? There are different ways we can say this in English. But we were going to the house of Anthony when we heard the news. So we were going. So as I said, with habitual actions, we can say we used to go. But this could also be we were going, right? This is what the imperfect can do. It's an action that is, we don't know what is going to happen after. Everything has happened in the past, though. The story is over. However the story continues, we know that it's all over. Okay? So the arrow is we were going to the house. It was interrupted by we heard the news. And so it's a dotted line with a question mark after that because we don't know what happens after that. Okay? But it's not a discrete moment. There's not the specificity of, the second verb in the sentence is in the preterit. We heard the news. There was one discrete moment cuando oímos la noticia. Boom. Okay? But as far as us going to the house, It was ongoing. It was en desarrollo. It was in development. It was ongoing. And then something happened. Sucedió algo. Suceder is to happen. So sucedió algo. Now, the reason we're doing all of this, as you guys continue doing your work, the reason we're doing all of this before we even look at the verbs conjugated into the imperfect is that I think it's important to understand conceptually what the imperfect in Spanish does over saying, comparing it in categories, right? Like if you would say used to in English, use the imperfect. You know, if in this situation, use the imperfect, I think it's better just to understand it conceptually. Although it may be a little bit more of a steep learning curve, it means you will assimilate it more fully as you use it, in my opinion. That's why we're being conceptual about this. Good. So what's happening here? It's like our graphic. We were doing a thing. We were hanging out on the balcony. It was going on. It was happening. I was drinking my coffee. There I was. Time was passing. And then, bah, a moment. Right? Explotó la bomba. Okay. Now, what are we noticing about all of our translations out of the imperfect here? We could say, like, if the sentence had been, I was hanging out, then we'd have a past continuous. Okay? It can also do that. It also handles the continuous past. But we tend to use the simple past for a lot of the stuff in English. Which means that's part of why, although generally speaking, English speakers use a lot more tenses, this sort of points out why the imperfect is so important in Spanish. It's why it's in that top 4. It does more work than our imperfect.